Tonight we're going to finish up Deism, and we've already passed the bulk of deist beliefs and looking at that in light of the Bible. Tonight is just we're going to finish up with one question. Were the founding fathers deists? Were America's founding fathers deists? One of the things that is a common statement by non-believers, secular historians, they like to focus on that the founding fathers were deist, atheist, agnostic, and they focus on that very secular aspect of the founding. There's a wide array of opinions and viewpoints about the founding fathers and their beliefs, and not all of them are easy to determine because, of course, that was over 200 years ago and, coming up 250 years ago. It's hard to really know for sure 100% exactly where everybody was at. But there's some that we have a better understanding than others, a better idea of others, more strong indication of where people were at spiritually, the founding fathers. And so the answer to that question, were America's founding fathers deists? Yes and no. We'll give you a nice answer. Yeah, very straightforward answer, yes and no. Some of them were, and many of them weren't. And so deists, but if you were to ask a deist, they would claim that George Washington was a deist. They would say Benjamin Franklin was a deist, Thomas Jefferson, Ethan Allen, and Thomas Paine. Benjamin Franklin was a fairly well-known deist, but even he recommended prayer for the assistance of heaven and referred to the Bible as sacred writings during the time of the Constitutional Convention, which is definitely different than what we've read of the modern day deists. Benjamin Franklin certainly was not a believer and was a deist to whatever extent that he was, but he had some regard for prayer and for the Bible. And then Jefferson himself is considered a deist very often, because he very much at least bordered on deism. One historian coins him as a theistic rationalist as opposed to a deist, because he had some recognition of God, and he didn't necessarily completely throw out the whole Bible. He just didn't like the supernatural aspects of the Bible, which would be something that would be what a deist would say or how they would think. But he didn't throw out the Bible completely. The deists that I've been reading from more modern times, they're just completely against the Bible. And so Jefferson, even if he was, you could call a full-fledged deist, was not the same in the sense of the attitude that he came across with about the Bible completely. Certainly he was deist to some extent, but the term theistic rationalist is one that is one phrase to use for him, kind of almost on the edge of deism. And then there's no controversy about Ethan Allen and Thomas Paine. I've read Thomas Paine's quotes. Ethan Allen was also a deist, and Thomas Paine was very hostile toward, very mocking of, and those quotes that I read in previous weeks of him, very much against Christianity, against the Bible, against the supernatural. And so no controversy about that. But there are a wide range of views on George Washington's beliefs. I mean, he's all over the spectrum, the way people look at George Washington. The deists would say, oh, George Washington was a deist. But then you would have some people, I've heard even like a Baptist historian say, yeah, he was baptized by a Baptist, but even though he didn't really attend a Baptist church, he kind of kept his tradition as far as his denomination. So I've heard that side of things. And so you go from one extreme to the other. Where was George Washington? And it does seem that he was influenced by deism, but he still held to Christianity to some extent. So one of the things I read is that pastors of that day seemed to view George Washington as a deist, which is that would be a reliable source of people who are living at that time and how they viewed him. But based on some of the things that he said and done, it's hard to say what was George Washington. The founding fathers as a whole, there are some who just paint the founders as, oh yeah, they were just all these Christian men, and then you have on the other side, no, they were deist, agnostic, they were atheists, they were a part of some grand scheme to fulfill Sir Francis Bacon's endeavor for a new world and a new Atlantis and whatever. I have a documentary on that, by the way. It's pretty interesting about Sir Francis Bacon. And then there's one that I want to get my hands on that's the hidden faith of the Founding Fathers. So yeah, you could go all kinds of directions, especially with George Washington. And but it seems that he held to Christianity to some extent. In his farewell address, he said, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable support. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion." So what he's saying is it would not be considered patriotic to think that morality can be maintained without religion. And he even said, "Who should let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion." And so that's different from the deists of today. If George Washington did hold some deist leanings, that he recognized that morality is based on religion. Now, the deists I was reading, they're completely against religion, completely, and they think that morality can come through rationalism, through reason. So once again, we see, where did they land? Well, we can't compare exactly deists of today with 100% the deists back then, except maybe Thomas Paine, but maybe Ethan Allen too. But so anyway, that's what Washington said in his farewell address. So that does not sound like some hardcore deist who's just throwing out Christianity and saying, "No, we can have morality without religion." As I've said, some Baptist historians, I mean, they would be certain, he was born again, even baptized scripturally, but yet stuck with his denomination for the sake of tradition. And so this is where the difference in interpretation of history comes into play, because evidently I believe he was Episcopalian, and he did not later on, he eventually came to the place where he was not partaking communion in the Episcopalian church. Now you can interpret that two different ways. Was that because he was deist and wasn't recognizing his church? Or was it because he actually held to more biblical beliefs than Episcopalians did and he wasn't participating for that reason? Once again, it's 250 years ago. So there's a lot of things about George Washington that are really interesting. I haven't read, there's some key things, books that have been written on him, or at least on the time of the founding. There was a Baptist historian who wrote a book, America in Crimson Red. I've been told over the years I need to read it, and I've never read it. I don't have a copy of it. But that might provide some insight as well. And that's more on the George Washington was a Bible-believing Christian man that he ended up. But so anyway, there's various views of that history, the interpretation of the history. But historian Greg Fraser could only be certain of two founders being deists after decades of research, only just solidly deist. So what the point of this is, and I'm not trying to draw some strong conclusions tonight on George Washington, the point is, because that would require even more research and reading and discovering where he was actually at, but the point is that deists like to claim Washington as one of their own and these other founders as their own, when in reality they're very slanted in their viewpoint, and you look at what was reality, it's not near as extreme as what they would try to paint it. So that's the whole point of what we're getting at tonight. And there's a Britannica article by David Holmes, and I found this interesting, and this is just a portion of it. He said, "For some time, the question of the religious faith of the Founding Fathers has generated a culture war in the United States. Scholars trained in research universities have generally argued that the majority of the founders were religious rationalists or Unitarians. Pastors and other writers who identify themselves as evangelicals have claimed not only that most of the founders held orthodox beliefs, but also that some were born-again Christians. Whatever their beliefs, the founders came from similar religious backgrounds. Most were Protestants. The largest number were raised in the three largest Christian traditions of colonial America. Anglicanism, as in the cases of John Jay, George Washington, and Edward Rutledge. Presbyterianism, as in the case of Richard Stockton and the Reverend John Witherspoon. And Congregationalism, as in the cases of John Adams and Samuel Adams. Other Protestant groups included the Society of Friends, the Quakers, the Lutherans, and the Dutch Reformed. Three founders, Charles Carroll and Daniel Carroll of Maryland and Thomas Fitzsimmons of Pennsylvania, were of Roman Catholic heritage. The sweeping disagreement over the religious faiths of the founders arises from a question of discrepancy. Did their private beliefs differ from the orthodox teachings of their churches? On the surface, most founders appear to have been orthodox or right-believing Christians. And by the way, when they say that, I'm not talking about born-again Christians. We're talking about holding to generally believing in God and Jesus death on the cross. And that didn't mean there were different traditions that in those denominations. So I'm not saying that just because they were part of those churches that they were born-again Christians. But it says, on the surface, most of the founders appear to have been Orthodox Christians or right-believing Christians. Most were baptized, listed on church rolls, married to practicing Christians, and frequent or at least sporadic attenders of services of Christian worship. In public statements, most invoked divine assistance. So that would go against the idea of what modern-day deism is, based on what we've seen, what we've read, that pretty much throws cold water on trying to equate the founders back at that time, most of the founders, with the modern-day deists, even though deists like to claim them. So one of these founders, I'm going to go through some quotes. These I took from the book published by Master Books, World Religions and Cults. They cite these in here, these quotes from some of the founders. Charles Carroll, who was just mentioned, he had Roman Catholic background, but the point of this is not so much were they born-again Christians. The question is, were they deists? And based on their own writings or their own words, he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he said, on the mercy of my Redeemer, I rely on for salvation and on his merits, not on the works I have done in obedience to his precepts. Now that doesn't sound like a Catholic either, but evidently, according to that article, he was of Catholic heritage at least. And so he is, although some Catholics do use the same terminology as born-again Christians in that they're claiming they don't rely on their works, that it is only Jesus. But the point here is, once again, he's calling Jesus his Redeemer. He's using the term Redeemer. He's talking about Christ. Robert Treat Paine was also a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he said, I desire to bless and praise the name of God Most High for appointing me my birth in a land of gospel light where the glorious tidings of a Savior and of pardon and salvation through Him have been continually sounding in mine ears, in full belief of His providential goodness and His forgiving mercy revealed to the world through Jesus Christ. That doesn't sound like a deist, but he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. Benjamin Rush, he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he said, my only hope of salvation is in the infinite transcendent love of God manifested to the world by the death of His Son upon the cross. Nothing but His blood will wash away my sins. I rely exclusively upon it. Also doesn't sound like a deist. John Witherspoon, he was also a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He said, believe it, there is no salvation in any other than in Christ. His atoning blood will reconcile you to God. His grace and love will captivate your souls. His holy and blessed Spirit will write His laws in your hearts. Roger Sherman was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. He said, I believe that there is only one living and true God, existing in three persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And he goes on, these are just little snippets of what he said, that the scriptures of the Old and New Testaments are a revelation from God. That's definitely not deism. That God did send His own Son to become man, die in the room instead of sinners, and thus to lay a foundation for the offer of pardon and salvation to all mankind, so as all may be saved who are willing to accept the gospel offer. That's pretty good. And then we have George Mason. He was a member of the Constitutional Convention and called father of the Bill of Rights. He said, my soul I resign into the hands of my almighty Creator, whose tender mercies are all over his works, who hateth nothing that he hath made, and to the justice and wisdom of whose dispensations I willingly and cheerfully submit, humbly hoping from his unbounded mercy and benevolence, through the merits of my blessed Savior, a remission of my sins. And then one famous founder, Patrick Henry, he was governor of Virginia, and he was a leading patriot of the time. And he said, "This is all the inheritance I can give to my dear family." This supposedly came from his last will and testament. He said, "This is all the inheritance I can give to my dear family. The religion of Christ can give them one which will make them rich indeed." And so there are many others. That was just a sampling. But many, many others who were founders, signers of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, those that were involved back at the time. And yes, there were competing interests back at the time. There were agnostics, there were deists, there were people who were wanting just simply to rebel for the sake of rebelling against Britain for other reasons. But there were those who saw that there could be a better way, that if this revolution was happening, this war for independence was happening, they wanted to build a country, found a country, have founding documents that were reflective of Christian values, God-fearing, Bible-based values. And yes, there were some other things mixed in, such as the rationalism and various philosophies, but there's no doubt that there was a heavy, heavy Christian and biblical influence on the founding of America. It doesn't mean America is if people say, well, is America a Christian nation or not? Well, how do you define what a Christian nation is? Whatever your answer to that is, the more of the issue is recognizing, even if someone says, well, no, America is not explicitly a Christian nation, America was certainly founded on the principles of Christianity, on the Bible, and with a very heavy, heavy Christian influence. And so the whole idea that people trying to purge Christianity or the Bible out of America's history just doesn't hold water. One big difference between then and now is that at the time of America's founding, deism and Christianity could better coexist, because even though deists didn't share the Orthodox Christian beliefs, they were more likely, like I said, with the exception of some like Thomas Paine probably, but there were those who leaned towards deism, but they kind of combined some of the Christian teachings with some rationalistic teachings. And so there was more of a mixture back then. And so even though they weren't completely dedicated to their Christian faith or to a Christian faith or to a denomination, they were more likely than today to respect Christianity and recognize the benefit of morality and religion. And one of the founders, I don't remember which one it was, who said that that the country they founded, the founding documents can only be for a moral people. It's not going to work for anybody else. And that has come true. That has come true. Why would it be so hard for us to get back to a limited government, constitutional, actually true to the Constitution? Can we have that today? There are people who want that to be the case today. I want that to be the case today. But no, looking at the reality of what America is like, America is not a moral nation. And so therefore, the people cannot handle or basically handle that small of a government or that much freedom. That's really the issue. Now, an interesting thing is that deists, as they recognized, even those who weren't Christians or professing Christians at the time of the founding of America, they were more likely to recognize the benefit of morality and religion, where deists today, some of the articles I was reading, their perspective is, well, yeah, no wonder that people who were influenced by Christianity and the Bible were moral, because it just keeps them in bondage, keeps them enslaved to just falling in line. That's their perspective of it, where in the time of the founding there would have been more of the consensus, even among non-believers or those that didn't profess any sort of Christianity, where there was a recognition among the founders that they may not have believed all of it themselves, but they couldn't deny the important influence of religion, of the Christian religion, on the morality of a nation. And And so you cannot have morality. There's no true morality without the Bible influence or Christian influence. And you can have that for a time, but ultimately that breaks down, that falls apart. And the deist viewpoint is, hey, it's through our rationalism, it's through our reasoning that we can be moral. Because it's just evident of what is right and what is wrong, and creation teaches us this, and we just look at it and we figure it out. But ultimately it just makes themselves their own standard of what is right and wrong, because they don't have anything solid to go by. And so so we need to recognize the difference between then and now. So there's a great hostility to Christianity among the deists, at least that deist website that I was looking at, very hostile. And one of the things that I've noticed, though, they have a problem with the charismatics, they have a problem with the prosperity stuff, they have a problem with all the crazy stuff, they have a problem with a lot of things they view as hypocritical and wrong in Christianity. And the fact is, some of those things they are correct on, but it gives them more ammunition, more fuel to the fire for them to oppose Christianity and the Bible. And so Christianity has gotten more corrupted and is a worse testimony than it was then. I mean, Christianity wasn't perfect then either. There were certain problems, doctrinally and otherwise, but things have gotten so much worse since then that it gives the opposers of the Bible and Christianity more reasons to mock or oppose or be upset with, or basically have more ammunition to say, hey, here's the problem with Christianity, because Christianity has gotten more corrupted, and it is a worse testimony. It's more corrupted and more of a bad testimony. And so the point here tonight is, were the founding fathers deists? Well, yes, to some extent, but not to the great extent that they would have us believe. And whether even agnostic and atheistic, the founders by and large were people who believed in God. They believed, they had a respect for the Bible, respect for Christianity. They recognized the importance of morality, Christianity, religion and morality. But yes, there were competing interests, and there were a variety of different beliefs and viewpoints at that time. So you would be having to look through some very rose-colored glasses to just have this wonderful picture of, the founders were just these born-again Christian, Bible-believing men. Well, that wasn't the case for most of them. But at the same time, you can't go too far the other way and just say, they were just all deists, agnostic, atheists, they rejected the Bible and they weren't Christians. The truth is somewhere in the range of the middle, and that involves more reading and understanding, historical research, and having a better picture. But what we can say is they are exaggerating their case when they try to make, even claiming George Washington. It's like, even if he had some leanings that way, George Washington certainly didn't have the attitude, at least from what he expressed, the same attitude that they have on that Deism website. That's just not the way it is. And so that's where we're going to end up with Deism, looking at the founders and giving an overview of that there was a recognition of God in the Bible and Christianity at that time, and there were believers at that time who were instrumental in the founding of our nation, and especially even certain Baptists. I'm not saying most of the founders were Baptists, or very few of the founders may have been Baptists, but there was definitely the early Baptist influences that heavily influenced the Bill of Rights. You have James Madison, the father of the Constitution, influenced by a Baptist, and there's certainly an influence based on the liberty, Christian liberty, because freedom of religion, liberty of conscience is a Baptist distinctive. A lot of those denominations back then, they didn't believe in that. They came from the heritage of, we believe in a state religion. That was what most of them came from. And so it was those who believed in liberty of conscience, and that's evidenced by the colony of Rhode Island. Colony of Rhode Island, they let people have liberty of conscience, where the other colonies, they had their state religion. Even though it was technically considered Christianity, it was Congregationalism or the Puritans, and then there were other ones that were trying to gain control as well. So So there was definitely a biblical influence in the founding of our nation, even if certain of the founders held to deist beliefs or leaned toward those deistic, rationalistic beliefs.